Welcome to the first episode of our Too Close to Home series, a series we are running on Patreon but also uploading to YouTube called Too Close to Home. Each month we select random Patreons and feature stories about their hometowns or where they are living now. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the creepier side of those places. But if you get selected and you want your hometown to be featured, we will be digging up a variety of different things, from paranormal stories, mysteries and true crime events. Now, without further ado, hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. Boston, Massachusetts. The Boston area of Massachusetts is known for its rich history, culture, and innovation. But such a varied past is bound to leave behind many tragedies, legends, ghosts, and baffling mysteries that defy explanation. Probably the best known is the Mercy Brown vampire incident, which occurred in Rhode Island in 1892, and is one of the best documented cases of the exhumation of a corpse to perform rituals to banish an undead manifestation. However, this is a case we have already covered. Boston also is the hometown of one of our patrons, Julia. So Julia, this one's for you. Hit those lights, sit back and enjoy the ghostly goings-on and legends in your neighbourhood. And we'll start with Fort Warren. Fort Warren is a historical fort on George's Island, located at the entrance to Boston Harbour. The fort was completed in 1861, shortly after the beginning of the American Civil War, and defended the harbour from 1861 through to the end of World War II. During the American Civil War, it also served as a prison for Confederate officers and government officials, and that is where the legend of the Lady in Black originates from. Mrs. Melaine Lanier was the devoted wife of a Confederate soldier, but after she received a letter from him telling her he was imprisoned at Fort Warren on George's Island, Mrs. Lanier was determined to free him. So she embarked on an audacious journey from her home in Georgia to Hull, Massachusetts. When she arrived, she cut her hair short and planned to break out her husband by posing as a man. On a dark, stormy night, Mrs. Lanier rowed a small boat from Hull to George's Island, armed with a pickaxe and a pistol. Her husband, who was in on the plan, hummed a southern tune to direct his wife towards his cell. She was also helped by some sympathetic Confederate soldiers she had befriended. After reaching her husband, Mrs. Lanier was rumbled by a Union officer and a scuffle ensued. The officer gained control of her pistol and the pistol went off, accidentally killing Miss Lanier's husband. As a penalty for her crimes, Mrs. Lanier was sentenced to death by hanging. She was granted her final request of being hung wearing female clothing, but all that could be found were black robes. A heartbroken Mrs. Lanier was executed and buried on George's Island, still wearing the all-black clothes. It is said that her tortured soul still haunts the area, and she has been spotted on several occasions wandering the island, floating around with a lantern, still dressed in the tattered gown she was hung in. She is known to tap on visitors' shoulders and yell at anyone trying to enter the dungeon where her husband was imprisoned. Her ghost is even said to have choked one horrified sentinel. The Lady in Black is not the only ghost reputed to haunt the island though, and the fort. There have been several other strange goings-on that have been blamed on the deceased inmates of Fort Warren. Boston Common. Today, Boston Common is a destination that teems with sunbathers, tourists, historical reenactors, and food carts. But the place enjoyed now by so many has quite a grisly past. Established in 1634, it was the site of public executions for more than 150 years. Back then, Puritan settlers regularly hanged those believed to be sinful, and it's believed the ghosts of their victims still restlessly roam the common. Reports of people hanging from trees are frequent occurrences, only to turn out to be nothing when investigated. Others have heard the eerie sound of creaking rope and blood-curdling choking with no explanation. Some have also reported spotting a weeping woman in colonial dress, believed to be Quaker martyr Mary Dyer, who was strung up by the neck in 1660. But let's look at another location, and that is Copp's Hill Burying Ground. Boston is crammed with cemeteries, the final resting places of some of the country's founding fathers, mothers, soldiers, and the forgotten men and women who shaped the evolving city. And while a few spooky stories surround all of them, Copp's Hill Burying Ground in the North End is considered to be the creepiest. Torrential rains often exposed coffin lids and gravestones at Copp's Hill, and they were ripped out of the ground to be used as roof tiles, foundations, and road improvement projects. And in one grotesque instance, a cook used one as a baking plate. Over the years, visitors to Copp's Hill have reported apparitions of little girls, shadows cast by no discernible beings, as well as orbs, streaks, and blurs, which is not surprising after such desecration to the resting place. Dayton, Ohio. Dayton is a city on the Great Miami River and is the 6th largest city in the state of Ohio. Dayton is most associated with aviation and is the birthplace of Orville Wright, who along with his brother Wilbur were pioneers of aviation and are generally credited with inventing, building, and flying the world's first successful motor-operated aeroplane. But Dayton is also home to another person named Jack Reed, who is one of our much appreciated patrons. So sit back, Jack, and enjoy our creepy tour of your home city. Library Park, Miamisburg. Library Park is in Miamisburg, about 12 miles from Dayton city centre, and was once the site of a graveyard known as Village Cemetery. It is also the place that set a record for the most ghost sightings in one location in Ohio. In the 1880s, locals began reporting sightings of a ghostly figure of a woman roaming the cemetery grounds. Day after day, multiple sightings of the apparition would occur at around 9 p.m. in the evening. Word got out, and people from all over came to the town to try and catch a glimpse of the ghost. However, the residents of Miamisburg soon got fed up with the disruption to their town, and were becoming more and more agitated by the ghost and the visitors it attracted. Locals who witnessed the apparition started to suspect she was related to the Buss family, as they recognised her as a member of the family who had been murdered a few years prior. So in a desperate attempt to stop her nightly appearances, they exhumed her grave and moved it to nearby Hillgrove Cemetery, in hopes that the haunting would end. But when this failed to stop her, eventually the residents took drastic action and gathered at the cemetery armed with clubs and guns and attacked the spectre. But as the clubs and bullets rained down on the lady in white as she floated through the grounds, they didn't affect her at all. So in a last desperate attempt, the town turned out en masse and began exhuming all of the bodies in the cemetery. One by one, the graves were moved down the road. But the ghost was undeterred and continued to haunt the area for the next 100 years. Today, things seem a little quieter, and the last positive sighting was in the 1980s, although it's believed the lady in white is not completely gone, and if you're in the area at around 9 p.m, you might still catch a glimpse of her. The Amber Rose. Today, the Amber Rose is a restaurant that specialises in Eastern European cuisine, located in the heart of Old North Dayton. But the original building, built in 1910, was until the 1980s a general store run by the owner, who also resided upstairs. However, in 1989, Eleanor Slozaz acquired the building with the intention of opening a restaurant. But just before the scheduled grand opening, there was a horrific fire, and a portion of the building was destroyed and had to be rebuilt. Eventually, the restaurant opened, but strange things have happened ever since. Staff have witnessed glasses flying off the shelves, lights and fans turned on in the upstairs office on their own, and other unexplained things. It's thought the daughter of the original owners of the building is responsible, and her nickname is Chicky. One of the restaurant's cooks claims to have seen the ghostly apparition of Chicky. He said she stood in front of him, lifted her ruffled dress slightly, and walked out of the room. When the management of the restaurant heard the cook's story, they decided to look at the surveillance tape. At the exact time the cook says he witnessed the apparition, this is what was captured on the tape. So the Amber Rose is considered one of the most haunted eateries in the state, and I wonder if Jack's ever eaten there. But let's take a look at Stivers School for the Arts. Stivers School for the Arts is a magnet school in St Anne's Hill Historic District of Dayton. The school began operations in 1908, but its haunting history seems to stem from a mysterious murder that happened in the school's basement pool in the 1920s. A teacher named Mary Tyler was found dead in the pool with a locket in one hand and a broken pointer in the other. The teacher was allegedly involved romantically with a senior student at the school, who disappeared around the same time Mary's body was discovered. The student was never seen again. Officials believe the unnamed student tore his picture out of the teacher's locket so that no one would suspect him, then disappeared. The school eventually covered over the pool, building a classroom on top of it. However, a trapdoor still leads down into the pool area, which is now used for storage. But it seems Mary Tyler never left. Over the years, students and maintenance staff have witnessed Tyler's ghostly figure levitating in the abandoned pool and floating around the lower levels and the network of tunnels lying beneath the school, banging on pipes and wailing loudly wherever she goes. Students have also reported odd occurrences in the classroom built over the pool, including disappearing objects, changes in temperature, and flickering lights. Visitors commonly sense something strange when they visit the school, not just in the location of the old swimming pool, but throughout the building. Sheffield. Sheffield is a city and metropolitan borough in South Yorkshire, England. Historically part of the West Riding of Yorkshire. Its name derives from the River Sheaf, which runs through the city. Sheffield played a crucial role in the Industrial Revolution, with many significant inventions and technologies developed in the city. In the 19th century, the city saw a huge expansion of its traditional cutlery trade, when stainless steel and crucible steel were developed locally, fueling an almost tenfold increase in the population. While our patron Ted is from Sheffield, and thought it would be a challenge to find anything about Sheffield other than the steel industry. Well, Ted, we think you'll be surprised what else is lingering on your doorstep. Let's take a look. Bunting Nook, Norton, and its big black dog. Stories of demonic black dogs are entwined in British folklore. These creatures are not your normal domestic dog, but rather a much larger species, often described as having glowing red eyes and a mysterious supernatural aura about them. Stories of their presence can be found in most countries in the UK. The different regions have different names for the creature, and in Yorkshire they are known as boggards or barguests, and it seems Sheffield has its own experience of the beast. Back in 1846, 16-year-old Alan Glover was savaged to death by a black dog in Bunting Nook, Sheffield. Ever since then, there have been numerous sightings of the demon dog thought to be responsible, which is reputed to haunt the road running through Bunting Nook. According to local legend, the creature appears suddenly out of the darkness and stands in the road, causing cars to stop abruptly, sometimes stalling their engine. Apparently, the creature has a dislike of men and will attack them if they get out of the car. The creature also has the ability to turn into mist if it feels threatened or a human approaches it. Numerous local residents and police officers have apparently spotted the dog over the years and describe it as extremely large with huge devilish saucer-like eyes and shiny black fur. Seeing the dog is considered to be a bad omen and a warning of the imminent death of the person who sees it or of a close family member. The boggart is said to be one of Sheffield's scariest apparitions. But we also have West Bar Roundabout. West Bar Roundabout in Sheffield has been the subject of many strange tales over the years, and the majority of them have been blamed on the ethereal vision known as Mr. Porter. Mr. Porter was allegedly an attendant at the old cinema which once stood on West Bar Roundabout. Nowadays is the site of self-storage units. However, when the old cinema was being refurbished, two electricians saw a man walking to the toilet. One of the men followed him to tell him it was closed off and to ask why he was there, but when he got to the toilet, the man had vanished. The electrician called down to his mate to ask if he had seen him pass him, but he said he hadn't seen anyone. Workers also reported to the site manager that they'd seen flashing white lights coming from the old projector room, but when they investigated, the room was empty. Spooked by the strange occurrences, they contacted a former worker at the cinema and asked him if he knew about the strange things happening in the building. He immediately said the ghost Mr. Porter was responsible. He told them that he was Mr. Porter's apprentice. He agreed to come to the building to have a look around, but as soon as he entered the premises, he asked the workers if they were running the old projectors, as he could feel the vibrations through the floor. He was told the room was empty, but he insisted that he see the room for himself. When they got to the door, the sounds were loud, as if the reel was running, but when they opened the door, the room was empty. The man was convinced the long-deceased Mr. Porter was responsible, and it's believed he still haunts the building to this day. The Northern General's Vicar's Corridor. With so many drawing their last breath in a hospital, it's not unusual for there to be tales of ghostly apparitions and restless souls residing in the buildings, especially in the older hospitals where care was not like it is today. The Northern General Hospital in Sheffield is no different, and the original Victorian part of the hospital, known as the Vicar's Corridor, is said to be particularly creepy. The corridor is named after Edward Vickers, a prosperous miller in the 1800s who later gained control of his father-in-law's steel foundry business, now known as Vickers Limited. Whether the corridor is haunted by him or his relatives is unsure, but there have been some spooky goings-on over the years. Doctors and nurses on the night shifts have plenty of stories to tell of the paranormal experiences they have experienced, and here are just a few of them. A young doctor got a cardiac arrest call on his bleeper system, so rushed down the corridor and encountered an old woman who wanted his help. He said that he couldn't help as he was going to an emergency. When he arrived on the ward, he found the patient was the same old woman he had just met in the corridor. Another doctor recalls walking down the corridor with a few other workers when an old woman came towards them. They moved aside to let her pass and noticed that she was wearing a lovely perfume, but when they turned around, she had completely vanished. There are also stories of nurses catching up on sleep and reporting the same dream. When they wake, they see the apparition of an angry, matron-like figure trying to strangle a ghostly patient. No sooner does the vision appear than it quickly vanishes. And then there is the knife and fork incident, when the nearby canteen was showered in cutlery and trays thrown by an unseen force poltergeist while staff were working the night shift. But perhaps the most disturbing tale is that of a smartly dressed elderly gentleman with a long white beard who wanders through the corridors as if he is inspecting the hospital before disappearing through a wall. Stories like this are very common, with many reports of ghostly patients walking up to doctors and nurses, asking them for something to help them sleep, but when the staff reach out to them, they disappear. Durham UK. Durham is a cathedral city and the county town of County Durham in north-east England. Founded over the final resting place of St. Cuthbert, its Norman cathedral became a centre of pilgrimage in medieval England. The 11th century castle has been the home of Durham University since 1832. The name Durham comes from the Celtic element Dun, signifying a hill fort, and the Old Norse Holm, which translates to island. Although some attribute the city's name to the legend of the Dun cow and the milkmaid who in legend guided the monks of Lindisfarne carrying the body of St. Cuthbert to the site of the present city in 995 AD. The city has been known by a number of other names throughout history. Durham is also the home of Harrison, who has recently moved to the city from France, so is probably unaware of the waft of ghosts that live amongst his new home city. Well, let's take a look. Medieval Crook Hall. Crook Hall is a medieval manor house built in around the 1200s and is one of the oldest inhabited houses in Durham City, Currently it's home to the Ball family, and for some years has been a wedding venue and visitor attraction. The hall is named after one of its former owners, Peter Del Crook. Over the years it has changed hands many times. Crook Hall is notorious for its paranormal activity. Ghostly sightings and strange occurrences have well been documented for hundreds of years. Such was its reputation that in the 19th century, when there was a coal mine nearby, the young miners were too scared to walk past the hall and would ask for their mothers to meet them and escort them home. One of the paranormal hotspots is the person-sized wall nook, located in the corner of the medieval hall. The story goes that a medieval soldier was brutally murdered in a fight over a woman, and ever since people have reported feeling chills or cold breezes emanating from the nook and felt a presence in the area. Another reoccurring apparition is the ghost of the woman in white. She is often seen or heard drifting around the building. In one peculiar tale, a banquet had been prepared and laid out on the tables in the medieval hall. But as the lord and lady of the manor led their guests in, a loud crash was heard. When they entered the room, all the tables and dishes had been upturned and were strewn across the floor. The ghost of the woman in white was blamed, as no one else had access to the room. The woman in white also haunts the ancient wooded staircase. She's been seen running up and down them, or silently gliding up the banisters. The previous owners, John and Mary Hogwood, are convinced that the woman in white is the spirit of Cuthbert Billingham's niece, a former resident of the hall. Many visitors have had other strange experiences at Crook Hall, including one who saw children playing in the gallery an hour after the last child had left the premises. Another visitor who was travelling home on a coach after visiting the hall reported that he had seen an older man in bedclothes and a nightcap asleep in a chair before he left. Other people on the coach confirmed that they had also seen the man. When this was reported to the owners, they confirmed no one of that description was in the hall that day and that they didn't know anyone who wears a nightcap. Jimmy Allen and the Gypsy Piper. Alvand Bridge is a medieval masonry arch bridge across the River Ware in the city of Durham. It links the peninsula in the centre of Durham and the Alvand area of the city and is a Grade 1 listed building. However, this historic bridge is said to be haunted, and if you stand on the bridge at midnight, you can supposedly hear the ghostly music of Durham's Castle's Northumbrian piper Jimmy Allen, who was imprisoned in the House of Correction beneath the bridge in the 18th century. Jimmy died in the prison 2 weeks before his pardon arrived, and he is said to have haunted the area ever since, playing his pipes as a reminder of the injustice of the life he never fully lived. Pickled Parson. About 20 miles from Durham city centre lies the little village of Sedgefield. The village dates back to Roman times and is recorded in the Domesday Book. Its church, St Edmund's, was built in 1300s, and in the 19th century, amongst the aristocracy, it was a popular place to hunt. And there is a reminder of its bygone popularity with the great and good, in the shape of Sedgefield Hall, a manor house built just by the village green. This wonderful old building was built by two noble sons of Sedgefield, Samuel and Shute Barrington, one an admiral and the other a bishop of Durham. However, the hall was not constructed for their benefit, rather it was built for their nephew George, who was the rector in the village in the 1790s. As a lavish replacement for the old rectory which had burnt down. Of course, such a long-established village has more than a few ghost hauntings, and indeed, its most famous spectre is said to haunt the site of an old rectory. This alleged phantom is known as the Pickled Parson. The story goes back to the 1730s, when a fellow called Reverend John Garnage was the rector of the area. He was responsible for the parish of St Edmunds and lived just a short way away in the old rectory. However, in the second week of December 1747, the good Reverend passed away suddenly and left his family in something of a pickle. Back in those days, the church collected an annual payment from its parishioners, and every year by law, whatever was due was to be paid to the parson on the 20th of December. This payment provided an income for the clergyman and maintained the church buildings. But in a case like this, should a parish be without a clergyman to collect the money on the 20th of December, all the money would instead go to the bishopric of Durham. Hence Garnage's family was suddenly facing the dire threat of poverty. Indeed, in that era, deceased clergymen's families had starved to death when the money ran out. However, the parson's wife came up with a cunning plan. She preserved her husband's body with salt to keep it fresh until the crucial December day, and the day after all the money had been paid, she summoned the local doctor, who suspected nothing and pronounced the parson dead and recently deceased. However, his ghost's name seems to derive from another version of the legend. For some telling of the tale claim she kept her husband's body fresh by soaking him in brandy, and propped the preserved parson up in the window of the old rectory, so that the payers could see he was up and about his business. However, there was one person who was apparently displeased, the spirit of parson himself. According to the old stories, because his body had been delayed in receiving a proper Christian burial, the parson's soul could not enter heaven, and therefore the earth-bound spirit returned to vex the village. Apparently the rectory became haunted with all manner of disturbances and eerie events. The pickled parson continued to haunt the rectory for many years afterwards. Indeed, it is said that the violent haunting only ceased when the rectory building caught fire and burnt to the ground in 1792. However, it's said that the pickled parson is still haunting Sedgefield. Local legend says that there was a special tunnel that connected the old rectory with St. Edmund's, and as the last surviving remnant of his old home, the unquiet spirit of the clergyman still haunts the gloomy passage. Victoria, BC. Victoria is the capital city of the Canadian province of British Columbia, located on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, off Canada's Pacific coast. Named after Queen Victoria, the city is one of the oldest in the Pacific Northwest, with British settlement beginning in 1843. Known as the Garden City, Victoria is an attractive city and a popular tourism destination, with a regional technology sector that has risen to be its largest revenue-generating private industry. Victoria is in the top 20 of world cities for quality of life, and there is no doubt British Columbia's capital is the most haunted local in the Pacific Northwest. Our patron Melanie is lucky enough to live there, and as we have discovered, her hometown has its fair share of ghostly residents. Let's first look at the Fairmont Empress Hotel and Parliament buildings. The Fairmont Empress is one of the oldest hotels in Victoria. It's situated in downtown Victoria, facing the city's inner harbour. The hotel was designed by Englishman Francis Rattenbury, who also designed the nearby stately Parliament buildings. In 1981, the hotel was designated as a National Historic Site of Canada for its contribution to the development of the chateau-esque style of architecture. However, the much-admired building is said to be haunted by its architect Francis Rattenbury, who fell from grace after being caught up in a scandal. At the time Rattenbury designed the hotel, he was a renowned architect, but as better trained and better educated architects emerged, he soon lost favour and found himself in financial difficulty. His personal life was also in disarray, and in 1923 he left his wife Florence and his 2 children for twice married 27-year-old Alma. His maltreatment of Florence, which included having the heating and lights turned off in their home after he moved out, and the public flaunting of his affair with Alma, led his former clients and associates to shun him, forcing him to leave Victoria. In 1925, he married Alma after Florence agreed to his request for a divorce. In 1927, the pair returned to Victoria, and there they had a son of their own, John, before deciding to move to Bournemouth, England in 1929. That same year, poor Florence died of cancer. In Bournemouth, Rattenbury's financial problems continued, causing strain on his marriage, and Alma began an affair with George Stoner, their 18-year-old chauffeur. In the early hours of the 23rd of March 1935, Rattenbury was discovered in his sitting room with severe head injuries. He had sustained a series of blows with a carpenter's mallet. the blows savage enough to remove the back part of his skull. He died 4 days later. His wife confessed to the murder, but it was actually Stoner who had carried out the deed. Alma and Stoner were both charged. Stoner was convicted and sentenced to death, which was commuted to life imprisonment after a petition. Alma was acquitted of murder and of being an accessory, but unable to live with the guilt, she committed suicide a few days later on June 4th, 1935, stabbing herself 6 times in the breast before throwing herself into the River Stour. Stoner served only 7 years of his sentence since he was released early to fight in the Second World War. He later married and lived a quiet life with his daughter until his death in 2000, so a tragic story all round. While after Rattenbury's murder, it is said that his spirit returned to the place of his former glory in Victoria and the Empress Hotel, and guests and staff have frequently seen a man in period dress on the staircase to the lower lobby and in other parts of the hotel. It's believed he returned there in the hope of hearing the praise once again for the magnificent building he designed. Pioneer Square. Pioneer Square is a small, rectangular park adjacent to Christ Church Cathedral, Victoria. It is known also as the Old Bury Ground, and it served as a cemetery from 1855 to 1873. It's thought about 1,300 bodies are buried there, although it's hard to tell from the few markers that remain. That's because in 1908, the markers were unceremoniously cleared out and moved to a back wall or put in storage. This was so the space could be turned into the city park it is today. Just a few tombstones still dot the landscape. Hundreds of people walk through the park every day, some stopping for a rest or a picnic, often unaware of bodies buried beneath them. However, they sometimes get a shocking reminder that something isn't quite right when one of the 2 ghosts that haunt the place makes an appearance. The first is said to be the spirit of R.B. Johnson, one of Victoria's founding fathers. He is usually seen standing in front of someone with a barber's blade in his hand, making motions as if he's cutting his throat. The records show that Johnson did indeed commit suicide by slicing his neck with a small blade. After his death, he was laid to rest somewhere in the cemetery. The second is of a woman thought to be the ghost of Adelaide Griffin, one of Victoria's first documented ghosts. Adelaide was the co-owner of the Boomerang Saloon in Bastion Square until she died of typhoid in 1861 and was buried in Pioneer Square. After her death, her spirit frequented the area so much that looking for her was a popular activity for the youths of Victoria. It is not only the graveyard she haunts, she has also been spotted in nearby Langley Street and Bastion Square. As a stark reminder of what lies beneath Pioneer Square, in 2013, restoration work was stopped after human remains were uncovered just 18 inches below the surface. So that's it for our first episode of Too Close to Home. We hope you've enjoyed, and don't forget for your home city to be in for the chance of being featured in a video and us doing a deep dive into the history of it. Don't forget to check out our Patreon page so you can read a bit more about our Too Close to Home tier. Thanks for watching and supporting. Without Patreon, we would not be able to keep up most of our videos, and especially not our documentaries. So a massive thank you to all of the support we've received over there. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.